Good afternoon, and thank you so much for joining us at this webinar on SQE1, Solicitors Qualifying Examination 1, when we're going to be talking about some changes that have been made to SQE1. Changes to the assessment window, to the way in which results are presented, and giving you some information about how results can be viewed in the future. In case you don't know me, I'm Julie Swan. I'm Director of Education and Training at the SRA. So we want to use this session, as I say, to explain some changes to you, but we will also be explaining throughout that much has not changed about the SQE. Nothing has changed about the way the exam is set, how the exam is marked, the questions that are used, or how the standard is determined. What has changed is some of the delivery features so that the exam can be taken over a number of days, or candidates can have some choice as to which day they take their exam. And crucially, the way in which results are presented, the way in which they are expressed has changed. But that doesn't mean the exam has in any way become easier or harder to pass. Just some domestics before we proceed. So this webinar will be available to view on demand in case you want to revisit it or in case you need to drop off at any point. There's a facility for you to submit questions if you like. We've had some in advance already, and thank you to everybody who's already put your questions in. We will try as we go through to address the questions that we've had, but there should be time at the end to pick up any more that come in. We've got about 45 minutes for this session. There will also be resources available so you can view the little video that we're going to show and have access to the slides as well. So, although I've introduced myself, I'm not actually going to be doing most of the talking. Most of the talking will be done by two key players from the Kaplan team who deliver the SQE on the SRA's behalf, Yanis Chrysantho and Lisa Coombs, and I will be handing over to them very shortly. But before I do so, just a little bit about why we are holding this webinar just now at the end of February. We're doing it now because the changes that have been made apply to SQE1 taken in January just gone, January 2024. We did give notice of the changes. We gave notice before the booking window for January opened, but we haven't explained in full detail in this way how everything will work. And we wanted to do so before candidates get their results, which will be on the 14th of March. So that explains the timing of this session. And the changes that have been made to SQE for January 2024 will carry forward into July will be the next sitting, and then January next year. Also worth noting that the January 2024 sitting was the largest SQE1 that we've had so far. And perhaps, Yanis, we can bring you in and ask you to reflect on how that very large sitting, and it was much larger than any sitting we've had before, how that went.
Yeah, thanks very much, Julie, and thanks for having us on today. Yeah, you're absolutely right. So the January sitting was the largest sitting. We had just over 6,600 candidates for SQE1 across 150 test centres, both in the UK and overseas. So certainly the largest delivery we had, and we think the most successful. Certainly the feedback we've had from candidates in the feedback survey in relation to the delivery, so the on-the-day delivery of the assessments was much higher. So we're really pleased with how it went. And as you say, results will be released on the 14th of March. And we feel the changes have really helped with that. And of course, it's worth mentioning that we've also just had the January-February SQE2 sitting as well. So it's been a busy time. We had just over 900 candidates for that. And again, a very successful sitting. Now we're in the post-assessment period where marking is taking place, the moderation and all of the other processes that we have there. So yeah, as I say, a busy time for us.
Thanks, Yanis. And I mentioned that one of the changes was to provide candidates with some choice about the days on which they sat their exam. Can you tell us a bit more about the changes to the assessment window and how that worked, please?
Yep, absolutely. So the assessment window has been changed it's been lengthened slightly, and essentially what we now have is 5 days, a Monday to Friday week, where FLK1 is running, and on the second week we have FLK2 again from Monday to Friday. So this is a change from what we've had before, where we've had a couple of fixed points for the assessments to take place. So what this means is that, subject to availability, a candidate has the choice to choose when they take FLK1 in that first week, and on which day they take FLK2 in the second week. So it's providing more flexibility for the candidates to be able to book a day that suits them.
Thanks, Yanis. But as I said, much hasn't changed about the exam. I think perhaps it might be helpful if those with us today can just be reassured that the standard, etc., the exam experience itself is the same.
Absolutely. So yeah, well worth mentioning. The fundamentals of the assessment are absolutely staying the same. So the standard is the same, that of the day one newly qualified solicitor. The process of setting the pass mark is the same. The type and number of questions in each FLK paper is the same. There's the same length of time for the assessment. How we mark has remained the same. They're multiple choice questions. Again, that's all remaining the same. It's really about improving on certain areas where we can. So the areas are the range of dates that are now available for candidates to take the assessment is greater. And the way that the information and the marks are displayed will be different, but in particular that means that candidates will now receive a much more detailed breakdown of their results, and we'll be looking at that later and in the video as well. And that's very important. And also linked to that is this move to scaled scoring that my colleague Lisa will be talking about a bit later on, and that essentially allows for comparison between papers and across sittings. So the changes are positive changes, but the fundamentals of the assessment, how it works, how we mark, all of those are remaining the same.
Thanks, Yanis. And as you said, we'll be coming later to scaled scoring and in much more detail with a presentation from Lisa. And that will be quite a detailed presentation, and opportunity perhaps to review the video will be welcomed by some. So just to recap then, the new timetable, the exams for SQ1 take place over 2 weeks, but it's still FLK1 in the first week and FLK2 in the second week?
Absolutely, yeah, that's the way, and it's worked well. It does mean that the window is slightly longer. The assessment window is slightly longer, but that's inevitable because we've provided more dates, and we've given 5 dates for FLK1 and 5 dates for FLK2. And again, it's inevitable to allow us to test the greater number of candidates that are coming through. But I think that should be balanced with the greater flexibility to candidates to select the dates that suit them. And we've heard in particular from candidates in the focus groups that flexibility is important, and if that could be provided, it would be a huge benefit. So there may be candidates that prefer to sit their FLK1 and FLK2 fairly close together, and there may be other candidates that like to have a few more days in between. So again, subject to availability, that is now available for candidates to be able to do that and manage the dates that suit them the best.
Thanks, Yanis. So SQE1 for January was taken over 2 weeks. Do you think there's any prospect that you might need a longer window in the future, or looking ahead, will 2 weeks be the limit?
At the moment, we think we'll be remaining with the 2-week window. No plans to extend that, and we think at the moment that's what it's looking like, and obviously we'll let stakeholders know if that changes, but no plans to change beyond that for the time being.
Thank you. So just why make the change? Why make the change now? Why make the change for January 2024?
Yeah, I think I mentioned one of the key reasons was that that was the feedback from candidates, that they wanted greater flexibility and choice in terms of when they sit. So under this new system, essentially, you could have a candidate that decides to sit FLK1 on the Tuesday in week 1, and they may feel that they want to sit FLK2 on the Monday of the next week, or they may decide that they actually want to sit it on the Friday. So they have that flexibility, and every candidate will have a different approach as to when they want to sit. So that was the feedback we heard from candidates. It's give us more flexibility to be able to select dates that suit us where possible. And as I mentioned as well, inevitably we needed to provide more dates to deal with the increased number of candidates that are coming through. So that was an inevitable consequence as well. But it has also allowed for some more varied start times to the assessments, both in the UK and overseas. And again, we heard from candidates that they did want, more flexibility if possible around the start times, maybe to account for kind of travel time. So again, where possible, this move has allowed that to a greater extent. It's not always possible, but where it is possible, we have provided for that. And then from our perspective and the SRA's perspective, it was very important that we try to minimise any disruption in delivery. So this move away from a kind of single event-based testing over 1 or 2 days to increase it to 5 days for FLK1 and 5 days to FLK2 just reduces the risk and the potential for candidates to be affected in greater numbers. And again, we found that we were able to resolve issues with a bit more flexibility this time around, because of that flexibility that comes with the longer assessment window with more dates available. And it's also had another practical effect, which is just making it easier to deal with overseas test centres and the different time zones that we're testing over. So as I say, it has provided some real benefits. So we're very glad we've made the change.
Lovely, thanks, Yanis. Okay, just a reminder, if anybody does have any questions, to pop them in the Q&A link that you should be able to see from the screen. But we're now going to move on to perhaps the more technical aspect of today's webinar. And I'm going to ask Lisa to come in and explain how scaled scoring works. Oh, Lisa, sorry, I can't hear you.
We go. Thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. So it's my job today to take you through a little bit of how the scaled scores work and the step-by-step that we follow in order to provide them. Scaled scores themselves are really common, and particularly around the sort of assessments that we do. There are a number of reasons for that. One of them is that it provides us with comparability between different tests and across administrations of the test. And that in itself provides a bit more flexibility, as you've heard. That flexibility also allows us to equate between tests as well, and to provide all of the scores and place them onto a common scale. That helps us also interpret the test scores a lot better, because we can put everything together in one place. So rather than have lots of separate elements, we can put that together and interpret the data a little bit better. It also provides more precision, because we're using a more distinct scale. That allows us to be a little bit more precise in how we look at performances. That supports fairness as well, so it allows us to remove any fluctuations in test difficulty. So they're already accounted for, but again, we can place those onto the same scale. And from a personal point of view for the psychometrics, it helps us a lot with the reliability and the validity of the assessment. It helps us minimize the measurement error that we see. So there are a lot of advantages. Scaled scoring only changes the way that we view the results. So actually the product underneath it is exactly the same. We still go through the same process. It's just the final presentation of results that will change. So when we have a look at the overview of what we do here, and I'm going to go through each of these step by step so that we can see a little bit more about how this actually works. All of the underlying process, as I say, will remain the same. So this is the same house. This is a new coat of paint on the same house, but everything that we follow through will be the same. The pass mark is set to a value of 300. We score, the scores between 0 and 300 are mapped between the raw score and the scale scores. We do the same for the values between 300 and 500. And we repeat that for every distinct paper in an assessment window and in every assessment window. So the pass-fail is based on the scale score, but the underlying pass mark is remains the same and will be carried through. So if we look at step one, the first step that we go through is to establish a pass mark. The pass mark process that we go through is a well-established method and follows best practice. That underlying process will be exactly the same. So the pass mark that we set is carried through the whole of the process of scaling and doesn't change. But what will change is that we will set that to 300 and we adjust the scores around it either side, above and below, relative to that pass mark. So so that won't change, and I think that's important to stress that will carry through. So if we move on to the next step, the easiest way that I think we can explain that is by showing you a few pictures and showing you how that plot would work. So here you can see an example where we have a raw score of 100 out of the 180 questions that would map to a score of 300, which is our scaled score pass mark. So for the purpose of this example, this is just a convenient round number that we've used. It actually would be a pass mark of 55.5% or thereabouts if we use the pass mark of 100. Previously, our pass marks have been in the mid-50s range, and that doesn't mean because we are setting the standard to 300 on our scaled score that that would automatically set all of our pass marks to 60%. I think that's important that we mention that because I know that we've had some questions about how the pass marks work and how they are relative to the raw score. So it doesn't provide a fixed pass mark. The pass mark that we set will be on the raw score and will be extrapolated to that score of 300. So if we look at the next step, once we've drawn our pass mark and got that point, we would effectively draw a straight line between our zeros and our score of 300 and the pass mark. And that's the straight line that we would use to convert scores that are below 300. So that provides the relationship at the lower part of the scale. Then when we look at the next part, we would then draw another line. So we go through the same process and use a straight line which converts the scores between the pass mark and 500 or 180 or the maximum score. It's more than likely not the same line. So there's although it's fairly imperceptible there's a little kink in the in that straight line there. So the relationship above and below the pass mark is a little bit different. I know we had a question from Daniel about the formula and that we use. So it's a straight line formula, so it captures the linear relationship. The values that we use will be different for each test, but the relationship is just a straight linear relationship. So it's a fairly simple equation that we're using. One of the reasons for that is that it helps us to explain it, and it's hopefully a little bit easier to follow and understand. So if we look at the next step, some of the examples here, you can see how using our line, we could map different scores to different scale scores. So our raw scores here of 80 would map to a scale score of 240. Our pass mark was 100 here, so that would map to a scale score of 300. And our score of 120 would map to a score of 350. So they're not quite equidistant above and below the pass mark, and it's relative to that straight line, but it is hopefully a relatively easy thing to follow how we then map from the raw score that you get to a scaled score. So the next step is the clever bit, and the reason why for me that we're using scaled scores. Here we've got two examples of two slightly different papers. So we have a paper that has a pass mark of 90, which is shown in green. We have a pass mark of 110 for the one shown in blue. And you can see both of those indicated by the circle in the middle, both of those pass marks. So the solid black line shows how the raw score of 120 would map to slightly different scaled scores depending on which paper you had taken. Likewise, you can see below in the dashed line how the scale score of 250 would relate to slightly different raw scores. So that relationship ends up as being slightly dynamic and based on the different delivery of the paper, but it's pivoted on that difficulty. I know we had a question about how we would treat scores from different difficulty papers. So this is the process that we go through in order to place them onto a common scale. So both of these papers would have slightly different difficulty levels, they have slightly different standards, but we would describe them both on that scaled score of 0 to 500 with a pass mark of 300 every time. And finally, if we have a look at the next step, you can see there our horizontal line of 300 and how that maps to the different standards with the raw score. So this is just for demonstration, and these are quite extreme examples of having a pass mark at 90 and 110. Like I say, pass marks generally been relatively similar, but with small differences in the difficulty. So, but here you can see very clearly how that would set up. So just to summarize, nothing is changing about the way that we're administering the papers. Nothing is changing about the work that we do in. We had a question from Max asking about whether 300 might change in light of our results if the majority didn't pass. But hopefully what you've seen is that the underlying process here remains intact. So our final scores are placed on the scale, but all the work that leads up to providing the scores are not changing. So as I say, this is the same house, this is the same process, the same validation, just the way that we describe results at the end is the same. All the standard setting, all the outcomes and the measurement error that we record, we are recording in the same way. So the psychometric work that we do will be exactly the same. It's the only change is the description. So anyone who achieves a passing score will pass regardless of the scale that we're using. And so that will carry through. If you are passing based on our pass mark on the raw score, you will pass on the scale score as well. So we did have a question as well on how the scaling for each subject area would work. And again, we are following exactly the same process as we are for the main test score. Every candidate's subject areas will be scaled using the same process. So again, pivoted at that point of the pass mark and using that same relationship with the scores above and below. So just one last question that came up, which was whether we would be introducing scaled scores for SQE2 as well. which was asked by Saskia, who's a current law student. Potentially, we would look at introducing them in the future. I think it is prudent to actually introduce them here first and just make sure that we understand them and that we can explain them to everyone and that everything works properly. But then we would potentially be looking at rolling them out for SQE2 in the future.
Thank you so much, Lisa. As I said, that inevitably was quite technical. The slides will be available. You can review this webinar at your leisure if you want to take more time to listen to Lisa's explanation. And we'll say a little bit more in a moment about how results will be presented. But a few questions have come in that perhaps it might be helpful for us to take now. One of the questions has sort of been answered by Lisa's slide. Somebody is concerned that if the exams are taken over multiple days, candidates sitting, say, FLK1 later in the week might have advance notice of the questions that are coming up. As Lisa has explained, one of the benefits of the scaled scoring approach is it does enable a fair way to enable us to present the results of multiple papers. Not all candidates will be taking exactly the same paper as you would expect in SQE1 going forward, and that is one reason why scaled scores have been introduced. There was a question about whether we expect pass rates to change as more candidates come forward and sit the assessment. That will depend. We don't set the pass rate. The pass mark is set according to the standard of that we're looking for of a newly qualified solicitor, and the pass rate simply flows from that. Now, quite often when a new assessment is introduced, over time, candidates perhaps become more confident. Training providers maybe adjust their provision so that they are better preparing candidates to pass, and that might result in a higher pass rate. But that's not an inevitable consequence. So the pass rate will be what it is. The standard will be set and maintained over time. And just to say once more, the standard hasn't changed as a result of scaled scoring. The standard remains the same. There was also a question from somebody who noted, looking at the sample questions that are published for SQE1, that some questions are longer than others. Yes, that's absolutely right, but that is taken into account when the papers are constructed. And in fact, we'll be saying more about how SQE1 papers are built at the conference we've got in March, so do look out for that. Can I just check, Yanis, Lisa, is there anything else you wanted to come in at this point before we move on to the video that we want to show?
Not from me, Judy. I think you've covered the questions that have come in.
No, and I think we're seeing a few questions about the difficulty and the standard setting. And again, there isn't a set number of people who can pass. We are standard setting according to the standard setting and marking policies. So we're just following the same process that we've been through previously with SQE1. This is, again, just a way of changing how we describe the scores.
Thanks, Lisa. Yeah, and the standard setting policy is available on the website to view. Okay, so let's move on then. So we just want to show a video that is already available to view, but candidates awaiting their results might be particularly interested in this. So hopefully it will work and it'll explain a bit more. It will bring scaled scoring a bit more to life. So let's have a look at the video, please.
Log into your SQE account by entering your username and password, then clicking the login button. You'll then see the SQE overview page. Scroll down to the section labelled Get Your Results, click on Show Details, then View Your Results. You can also access your results by choosing the Results tab on the right-hand side of the page. On the Results page, you will see an overall mark as a scaled score figure out of 500. The pass mark will always be 300. For both FLK1 and FLK2, you will also see how many correct answers you got out of 180. Then, if you have passed or not passed. There will also be a detailed breakdown of your marks organised by practice area and mark. These marks are also out of 500 for each practice area. For those that are resitting SQE1, you can see your earlier results by clicking on the View Previous Results. Depending on when you took SQE1 previously, your results will show in one of two ways, either showing a similar breakdown of your results out of 500, or in the old format showing a percentage mark out of 100.
And that video is available to view. If you've registered for this webinar, if you've let us know that you're attending, we will send you at the end a link so that you can easily access all of the resources. Yanis, you were going to show us a results page. So this is what a candidate will see.
Yeah, thanks, Julie. So it's just building on the video that we've seen, and it's just a chance to show candidates a different example. So it does repeat what was seen on the video, but we can just flag a few points. So this is the results page for FLK1 for a fictitious candidate. And I say I like this example. It's different because here we have a candidate that's passed FLK1, but as we'll see in the next slide, hasn't passed FLK2. But just focusing on this, if I was a candidate, I'd be looking at the core information, my name, checking my candidate number, for example, and you've got the basic information about the date of the assessment, the number of attempts, information on when the deadline is to pass the SQE, so the 6-year rule for this particular candidate. And then you can see the updated pass mark, so the new way of displaying the pass mark as a scaled score of 300. And for this candidate, you can see that their scaled score is 390, and that the result is a pass. They've clearly passed this, and it does say that. But the candidate will see also what we refer to as the raw scores, so the number of correct answers. So again, for this candidate, their scaled score was 390, and in terms of how many questions they actually got correct, they got 136 of 180 questions correct. So they still do see that raw score information. And then finally, in terms of the quintile, this is all explained on the website and has been there for the last couple of years. But for this candidate, they are placed in the first quintile, so they're in the top 20% or the top fifth of the cohort for this particular paper, for this FLK. So again, if I was a candidate and I was looking at this new method of presentation, I'd be focusing on the fact that I have passed my scaled score of 390, and if I did want to know that I got 136 questions correct out of 180. And then if we move on to the next slide, you can contrast this with the results for FLK2. So unfortunately for this fictitious candidate, if they scroll down to the bottom where it says result, they can see that they did not pass. So then I'd be kind of looking at the detail above that to say, okay, the pass mark, as we've said, is set at the common scale of 300. Their mark was 162. Their scaled score was 162, so quite far below the passing mark. And again, the candidate can see that in terms of the raw answers, or the number of answers they got correct, they only got 55 out of 180 correct. And that means that they were placed in the fifth quintile, or the lowest quintile. They're in the bottom 20% for this paper, for this cohort of candidates. And as I say, this is a nice example because we will have situations where candidates have performed well on one paper, on, for example, FLK1, and less well on FLK2, and they may need to resit one of those papers. So in this particular case, this candidate would be considering resitting FLK2. So this is, whereas a lot of this information has already been presented in the older format when we were not using scaled scoring, but it's helpful just to point out here how those figures are now displayed for the pass mark and the actual mark of the candidate on that scaled score of 300 being the pass mark.
Thanks, Yanis. We're getting some more questions in about why we've introduced scaled scoring and how the pass mark is set. So if you've been following the SQE story and perhaps looking at the statistical reports that are published after each sitting, you will know that the pass rate varies. Sorry, the pass mark varies. The pass mark is set for each assessment. And there's nothing unusual about this. That is so often the case with an exam. It's slightly adjusted to allow for a paper that is slightly harder than was expected when the exam was set, or maybe slightly easier. That's why there's not a predetermined pass mark. But with multiple papers being taken in one sitting, if we hadn't gone for scaled scoring, for one sitting there could be multiple pass marks. And so scaled scoring enables us to present the outcomes in a much more straightforward way, with everybody's mark being scaled in the same way, so that the pass mark will always be 300, although the number of questions that a candidate has to get right to achieve the pass mark of 300 will be adjusted, probably only a little bit, and in some cases it doesn't need to be adjusted at all, to allow for whether a paper is a little bit harder or a little bit easier than other papers that have been taken. Lisa, did you want to add to my attempt to explain scaled scoring?
Yes, very happy to. And I think because the questions coming in about the relative ease or difficulty of the papers, actually the process that we go through to standard set is an objective process, and the aim of the scaled scores is to place everything onto the same scale. So easier papers will have a slightly higher pass mark, harder papers will have a slightly lower pass mark. There are some small fluctuations, so we never go out of our way to try and set papers that are particularly difficult or easy. They're all designed to be the same standard, but the pass mark itself on every paper is always at the point of the newly qualified solicitor. So that's the aim is to capture objectively the level of minimum competence and the level of knowledge that's required. And then that is going to be the same across all of the different papers. It's only then when we put it onto the scale that they'll have equivalent pass marks. And it means that we can all sit different papers, we can sit at different times, and the pass mark that we have, the score that we have, the scale score now, will be the equivalent of someone in the same window or in a different window, regardless of the small differences that we might see in difficulty. So the passing standard will be objectively set and still follow the same process. It's just the final score that we receive that is scaled and placed on that common scale so that we can provide better and more meaningful comparisons between each other.
Thanks, Lisa. And I can see there's a question has come in about whether there are variations in levels of pass marks, or is it just a pass-fail? So this isn't a graded assessment. It's not like having a degree classification or an A-level grade. So the focus is on pass-fail, but candidates are told in which quintile their performance fell. So they are told whether they were in the top 20% of performers, or the top 40% of performers, or the top 60% of performers, and so on. They have been told that already, and they will continue to be told that. I can see we've had some questions about results day on 14th of March. Nothing is going to change about results day. Yanis, is there anything you can add? There is an explanation of how results days work, but you might want to just come in and reassure
Absolutely.
people it'll be the same as normal.
It's the same process we've followed before. So after 11 o'clock in the morning UK time, candidates will be sent an email with a link allowing them to log into their candidate account to access their results, and they will see there. So it's the same process we've followed before, and approximately a week before results are released, we remind candidates of that process on the website with a short SQE news item explaining what happens next and and what will happen on the day, and how they might want to go about booking SQE2 if that's what they want to do. But yeah, the process remains the same as we've seen for previous SQE1 results releases.
Thank you. We've had a question about somebody who has passed FLK1 previously, has sat FLK2 in January. I want to know what they will see on the results page. Yanis, can you help with that, please?
Absolutely. So I think it was actually mentioned in the short video. Essentially, the change in the display will apply from for the January sitters onwards. So from this January, for anyone that sat in January, they will see their results for whichever paper they sat. If it was both or one, they will see it displayed in the new display as a scaled score. And I think on the video you saw there was a button to allow candidates to click back to look at previous results. So previous results will remain unchanged in terms of how they're displayed. So they will see their previous results displayed in the older format, if you like. So just to be clear, the changes relating to the way results are displayed will apply for anyone that sat January SQE1 and onwards.
Thanks, Yanis. And the other change for candidates who sat SQE1 in January is that they will receive a breakdown of how they have performed in the different practice areas. This is something that candidates have been asking for, and training providers, in fact, have been asking for. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, Yanis, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think this is, of all the things, this is one of the most important areas to look at. And if we go back to the slides, we've got just another screenshot of the results page, and I'd like to say thanks to my colleagues Mark and Ella for helping produce these. So what we have here is the detailed breakdown. So there is a function that says SQE1 full breakdown of marks, which you can see on the slide, and on the video the candidate clicked on that, and this information then drops down. And so from a candidate's perspective, this is really key. And how would you use this information if you were accessing it? So this particular candidate we mentioned earlier had performed very well on FLK1. And if you look at those scores, which are displayed there, they're all relatively high. They're all above the passing scale score of 300. And they all are actually, some of them are very high. And we mentioned earlier, this candidate placed in the top quintile for this paper for FLK1. So they performed very well and they passed FLK1. So if I was a candidate in this situation, I'd be focusing on the detailed breakdown of FLK2. And here again, it's broken down by practice areas, starting with ethics and professional conduct at the top. So this candidate can see here that where they were scoring above 300 for ethics and professional conduct, they actually performed below the passing grade, the passing score in every other practice area. So again, if you look at criminal law and practice and criminal liability and trust, they are quite low scores, and they're not very close to the pass mark. So this candidate would be considering a resit, would be considering those practice areas that they haven't performed well in, and I guess it would help them focus. Maybe if they were working with a training provider, they could talk to the training provider to see where perhaps they weren't performing well, what the reasons were for that, and will help focus some of their revision or some of the learning that they're doing maybe in the workplace to see if they can improve their knowledge of those areas. And again, it's worth mentioning that you don't necessarily need to have scored 300 in every practice area. It's FLK1 is taken as a whole and FLK2 is taken as a whole, but it is very helpful to have that breakdown so a candidate can see, you know, which practice area am I performing better at, which of the other practice areas I'm perhaps need to work on a bit further. And this is some of the feedback that we've had from candidates and training providers around providing more detailed information to candidates to assist them with their resits and their revisions. So that's the key thing I would be focusing on if I was a candidate. I'd be making sure I was really looking at the detailed breakdown of my marks, in particular if I found that unfortunately I hadn't passed a particular a particular paper.
Thanks so much, Yanis. And we've actually had a question in about what happens when a candidate fails. So a reminder that if you fail FLK1 but pass FLK2, you only have to retake FLK1 and vice versa. But even if, as with this candidate, you scored really well in ethics and professional conduct, but poorly in every other area, you still have to retake the whole of the exam. You don't sort of get waved through on ethics and professional conduct. They are the exams stand alone. So if you fail one, you have to resit the whole of the exam. There's a question about, can you just set FLK1 or FLK2 in different assessment windows? No, you have to take both together. But if you fail one, you clearly only have to retake the one that you failed, and so you will do that in a different assessment window. We're almost at time, but there was just a couple of other questions I thought we could just fit in. Somebody has asked whether there's a cap on the number of people who can pass in any one sitting. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If you reach the standard, you pass. If you don't, unfortunately, you fail. But there's absolutely no cap. In theory, we could have 100% passing, and in theory, we could have 100% failing. It just depends on how candidates perform, how many candidates reach the standard. There have also been some questions about the booking process, which isn't really the purpose of this seminar, but I think we've probably just got time to answer those. So somebody, Russell, has noted that with this change of approach, with exams being available over multiple days, that will help with the capacity, help with the number of seats that are available. Absolutely, yes, and does make many more seats available. We didn't have a problem with accommodating the number of candidates who wanted to sit in January, and we don't expect problems, but we're never going to say absolutely every single candidate is guaranteed a place. But certainly this is one of the reasons for the change in approach to enhance capacity, and also, as Yanis has stressed, to give candidates the choice of days on which they want to sit, and also to make it more likely that they can get their preferred venue. But again, we will never guarantee that a candidate will get a seat in their number one venue as far as possible. They will get a seat that's convenient to them, but that can't be absolutely guaranteed. And some there's changes about the actual booking process. So candidates who took SQE1 in January and who want to book to take SQE2 in April have all been contacted and have been given the opportunity to indicate if they do want to go ahead and sit SQE2 in April, and to indicate where they would ideally like to sit it. And that's very much to help ease the booking process for the candidate and to reduce the likelihood of them having to, on results day, join a queue and find a place. That is very much being looked after. But candidates in that situation have been communicated with and know just what to do. So we are at time. In fact, we're a little over time. So can I thank Yanis and Lisa very much for taking us through that. I hope that you have found this session useful. A reminder that the resources that we've used, the slides, the video that we've shown, are available to view. If you've, as I said before, if you've registered, let us know that you're joining this session. We will reach out to you. We will send you a link telling you how to access those resources, and crucially, we will also invite you to complete a feedback form so you can tell us whether you found the session useful and perhaps suggest topics for future such webinars. So I think that's the end. Thank you again for joining us, and I hope you found the session useful. Bye.